Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for one event in our Conversations series. So what we're doing in these conversations is I am Lauren Bairnsfather. I'm director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and I am bringing conversations that I get to have usually behind the scenes to light so that everyone can learn from the amazing people that I get to talk to in my role. So
Marcel Lamont Walker, or ML Walker, is an award-winning graphic prose creator and expert in social applications for comic book art. In 2017, he was voted Best Local Cartoonist by readers of the Pittsburgh City Paper in their annual Best of Pittsburgh poll. In 2018, he was awarded a BMe Community Genius Fellowship in recognition of his work in the arts and related community activity. He is the lead artist, book designer, and project coordinator for the acclaimed comic book series CHUTZ-POW Superheroes of the Holocaust, published by the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. He is also the president of the board of directors for the ToonSeum, Pittsburgh's nonprofit museum of comic and cartoon art. And as you could hear from that introduction, I work closely with Marcel Walker at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and there is no one I would rather have this conversation with. So Marcel, thank you for being here with me today.
Yay. Hi, Lauren. Thanks for asking me to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, so we are at this moment right now in the United States where we have an opportunity to have some hard conversations. And these are conversations that are really centuries overdue. And it's important to the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh that we take this moment to have these conversations. It's what we do. We have difficult discussions all the time. Yeah. And what I'm going to practice during this conversation is my skill in listening. So that's as much as I'm going to talk unless it's appropriate. So for starters, Marcel, I'm wondering, what do comics and superheroes mean to you?
You know, the short answer to that is they mean everything. Because I find that I think about comics all the time, like literally all the time. I've read that Jimi Hendrix has said that he thought in music, and I find that I think in comics, and I don't think I'm unique in that regard. I guarantee you, anybody else who's made comics their profession, they think in comics. After a certain point, it's part of your life, it's part of your livelihood, it's part of how you interact with the world. So there's rarely an instance in my life where, at some point it doesn't intersect with comics. But that said, like superheroes in particular, they are so emblematic of the medium of comics that I tend to filter. A lot of my reality gets filtered through the lens of comics and by default through superheroes. So more often than not, like when I meet people or I become engaged with people, I tend to see the superheroic in them, and it's really not hard for me. Like it's almost second nature at this point, where my mind just sort of extrapolates, what their power set would be based on who they are, and it's really kind of a second nature thing. And sometimes it happens instantaneously. Sometimes it happens after the fact. I'll be thinking about that person or whatever, and it just sort of comes to me, oh, this is their superpower. Oh, this is their thing. And like in my case, like as people always ask me, like I get the question all the time, like Marcel, what superpower do you have, or what do you think is your biggest superpower? I have always said I think my greatest superpower, my real life actual superpower, is my ability to make great friends. and I think that's a very real thing. So for me, the idea of superpowers, that's not a fictional construct. That's a real thing. And right now in the world, a lot of like our first responders are often now referred to as superheroes. And I think that's appropriate. I think that them being able to do what they do with the conviction that they do, that's superheroic. I don't think there's any other descriptor for that. So, again, comics and superheroes and all things pertaining to that, it's kind of all encompassing for me.
I think that's really interesting because you've described a worldview basically through the lens of comics, and we'll dig into that a little bit more later. So As I said in the introduction, you are all things CHUTZ-POW at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, and I'm wondering about your involvement with the project. You know, you go back to before my time at the Holocaust Center, so can you tell us about that?
Sure. Yeah, so CHUTZ-POW, CHUTZ-POW as a project has been in existence longer than I actively think about it, because since it started, it's been going, and it's been a part of my life. And every now and again I'll stop and reflect on it. I realize, oh wow, it just keeps changing. Like, oh wow, CHUTZ-POW's been around for 4 years. Oh wow, it's been here for 5 years. Oh, it's been here for 6 years. And the fact that it's still here is the best part. Like when I have those thoughts or those conversations, it's not about a thing that I once did, it was in the past. It's about a thing that is still active and ongoing. That's the best part. But like CHUTZ-POW, its origins started, really simply. The idea was brought to the Holocaust Center, not by me, but the idea was brought to the Holocaust Center to create, it wasn't a comic book at first, too. I have to say that it wasn't envisioned directly as a comic at first, but the idea was brought to the center to utilize comics art and the medium, things about the medium, to revamp Holocaust education. So, and I'm giving a very snapshot type version of this because there's a lot of details and I could just get lost in all this. But a committee was convened, and there were people from the Holocaust Center, there were people associated with it, there were staff members, there were other members of our community. That's how a relationship was forged with the ToonSeum. So a representative from the ToonSeum was on the committee. From that, Wayne Wise was brought on board to that committee as well as an advisor. And Wayne is a local comics historian and writer and all-around go-to person in the world of comics. So these people were convened to kind of brainstorm with what this project would look like. And in time, it was decided to do two things: to make an art exhibit that would detail the stories of Holocaust heroes and survivors, but also having a companion comic book that would do the same. And once those two things were settled upon, their creatives needed to be contacted to actually bring these things to life. Wayne, being a comic book writer, he became the lead project writer, so he wrote the stories that got selected for the comic, and then different artists were chosen. And because of my affiliation with the ToonSeum, my historic affiliation, I knew the founder, and I had worked on other committee activities, and they knew me as a local artist and creative. They knew me, so I also, because of my relationship with Wayne, I knew about the CHUTZ-POW project. So I've always said, if they hadn't asked me to be a participant, I was going to be a participant. That wasn't an option for them. So I got on board the CHUTZ-POW project and learned more about it, because it wasn't even originally called CHUTZ-POW. It was originally called Upstanders. And I have to say, I really like that name because it felt and sounded, again, more superheroic to me. Like I said, everything is filtered through those sensibilities for me. So when I heard that name, I just thought, well, that sounds perfect. It sounds like the Avengers or the Defenders, the Upstanders. That's great. But things evolve, and as the project moved along, Wayne actually came up with the name during the course of a meeting, and it's a perfect blending of subject matters. You figure, CHUTZ-POW comes from the word chutzpah, of course, and chutzpah being a Yiddish expression meaning, having determination and moxie, and so you've got like that energy, but you also have it expressed. The POW comes from comics, and that the way we imagine comics imagery and sound effects. So I think it at first, I will say, because I was so attached to the term Upstanders, I didn't immediately just warm that's really going to be our name. But then very quickly I realized, that's the only name that this project can have. And it's great when we tell people about CHUTZ-POW, because they just get it really, really quickly. So we developed that art exhibit, and that debuted at the 2014 Pittsburgh Three Rivers Arts Festival, and that was a success. And then a little later that summer, I believe that was August of 2014, we had the release of the first issue, and that was a big old release party we had, and it was wonderful, and the reception that the book got was amazing. And then we knew just right away that we were going to continue this project. It wasn't a one-off. This was something we were going to keep keep producing. So very soon after, we started plans on volume 2. Every issue became very thematic. We talked about ideas right up front about what successive volumes in the series could look like. In the second issue, I continued my role. My involvement with the original project editor, Zach Zaffis, was really tight. And so I became, we were partners with that. And he was very, very giving and really hardworking. And I wouldn't know until later exactly how hardworking he was on his end, because we did volume 2 and my role increased. I became the official lead artist on the project, and more or less a liaison with the other creatives. I wrote a story in the second issue. Wayne had written all the stories in the first issue, so he wrote all but the one story I wrote in the second. And our team just kept expanding. So then I was actually invited, after the second volume, I was invited to come on staff at the Holocaust Center, and in the role of project coordinator. So basically I was taking that over from Zach. It was a great opportunity. It was an unprecedented opportunity as far as I'm concerned, because as far as I know, there's nothing like that exists here in Pittsburgh. And I mean, I could be wrong. I don't think there's a role that's exactly like this really anywhere. I would hope that I'm wrong, and if somebody knows of something that's comparable, let me know. But yeah, it was an opportunity that I could not pass up. I got to work with Zach that first year very directly, handing those reins off, so I learned the ropes, even though as the project continued to evolve. We produced volume 3 with the largest assemblage of creative talent that we've ever had, and that was just wondrous to watch that evolve. We had more writers involved. We had a really nicely cultivated creative team. And it was just such a great experience. So then, we've continued that now with the production of volume 4. And so to watch the project evolve from volume to volume has been an amazing thing to witness. I'm still really, really proud, I just got to say, of volume 1. Considering we didn't have a template for what we were trying to accomplish, this wasn't just any kind of anthology comic, because this was not the first anthology comic to ever be produced by far. This was not the first biographical comic to be produced by far. But what I think one of the distinguishing qualities of this series is, from the outset, it was intended to be used in educational settings. So in schools and in places of learning where people could learn more about the Holocaust and learn about how that relates to our world today. That is the most unique aspect of it, and also in that space where the project was evolving after I came on board was the creation of something that we talked about all along, which is the creation of the CHUTZ-POW Teacher's Resource Guide. My hands were not as directly involved in that, but I was there for its creation, and of course our teammate Jackie Reese was instrumental in putting that together. And to me, that is the other companion part of CHUTZ-POW, because that's the thing that allows people to really leverage this series to its fullest extent. I think you can get a lot from the book just by itself. Like, if you can't get something from CHUTZ-POW just reading it issue to issue, then it doesn't work. But if you also have that teacher's resource guide, you're going to maximize what you're learning and what you're able to help instruct with it. So it's that's where our history kind of brings us to this right now. It just keeps growing. That's the best part.
It does keep growing, and I'm glad you mentioned the Teacher's Resource Guide, and a shout out to Jackie Reese. What that resource guide does is it contextualizes the stories in each volume and also defines terms, geography, just makes it a lot more accessible. So for teachers who are assigning a comic book that students are drawn to immediately, the teachers can also feel comfortable that they're coming at it with the background information that they need to teach about it well. So yeah, I love this project, as you know, Marcel. And one thing that you've done more and more is invite a very diverse group of creators to the project. So why is that important?
So it's really all important. We could delve into the history of comics as a medium, and it's just a matter of record. When you look at the participants in comics creation from its inception, it's predominantly been white men. Not exclusively, never exclusively, and it requires more work to go in there and see the other people who were participating. I'm right now I'm speaking more strictly of American comics as opposed to global comics. But there have always been women involved in comics. There have always been people of color involved in comics, but it's predominantly been white men who have more or less dictated where it has gone historically, at least up to a point. So now, things have always been changing. And one of the things I will also point out that always, I think, attracted me to comics was when I was coming up, I had no sense of who was making these books. I mean, you figure this is before the internet and before you just automatically knew what the creators on the other side of your comics looked like. So you had the work to go by, and there was a sensibility of them. Different comics companies had their own vibes, and over time you would learn more about the creators, and there were editorial pages, there were, readers pages where you would hear things from editors. So if you were really into the culture at all, you started to learn things about the creators, but you rarely saw them. You saw the characters, and you read the stories. And in a world where we're far more connected now, I think it's vital that we know who's telling these stories, and it's vital that these people look as much like the rest of the world as possible. The only way you're going to get stories that are really reflective of the real world are by having people who are reflective of the real world creating them. And early on, we talked, when I say we, the CHUTZ-POW committee, we talked about this, about the involvement of other creators in this series, because that was just, as I saw, that was the only way the series was going to work beyond that first issue. Like, it had to involve with an influx of voices. So, yeah, I'm very happy with how that's progressed. Volume 3 really spoke to the potential for involving these other voices and how that could enhance this story that we're talking about. CHUTZ-POW, of course, is an inherently Jewish project. It has its genesis in Jewish culture, but that doesn't mean that these stories only speak to Jewish audiences. And actually, I would say they have to speak to everybody. Those stories have to be told to everyone, and they have to be absorbed by everyone. So the only way you're going to take something that comes from a specific culture, take narratives that come from a specific culture, and engage people of all cultures, is you have to have a full breadth of voices telling those stories. There's just no other way around it. I've heard it said that about America being a melting pot. Our thinking about that is often we're just a melting pot, and that's great, and that should be celebrated, and that is true. But a thing that I think often gets overlooked is being that is hard work. That's something we actually have to actively work at. It doesn't just happen naturally. And that's the case in creative pursuits too, I think. This didn't just happen naturally. We had to actively think about it and actively make it happen. With every issue of CHUTZ-POW, we have to actively go out and seek the right voices to tell these stories. It's obviously worth it because the stories, the end result shows why this is so important. You don't want this homogenized group of stories coming out. You want to see that inclusivity reflected in the way the stories come out. And I think we've done a really good job of that. And, with Volume 4, we have the broadest group of creators that the series has ever had. And that's something I'm going to brag about forever, because that shows that we're doing what we can do. It's a reason why I take my role with CHUTZ-POW very seriously, because, for all intents and purposes, I'm the face of this project. And, we have a coworker that refers to me as Mr. CHUTZ-POW. And that's really important, because I myself am not Jewish, but my culture intersects with Jewish culture. So to me, that speaks to what this project is about. I take that very, very seriously, as a charge and as a responsibility. And from what I've seen, every CHUTZ-POW creator, every artist, every writer, every person affiliated with this project has takes this seriously.
So I have to give you a lot of credit, Marcel, for teaching staff of the Holocaust Center, which sometimes is probably not the most comfortable place to be, but I'll speak from personal experience. We had a conversation years ago where I was talking about a certain experience I had traveling, where I said, it's the kind of situation where it was very strange for me. I had to know what was happening in front of me, behind me, and to my left and to my right at all times. And your response was, oh, it's like being a Black man in this country.
Mm-hmm. I remember this conversation. Yeah.
And even saying that now, it gave me in that moment an understanding at a level that I had never had before. And that memory stays with me as we're seeing everything that's happening in our country right now. So I wanted to ask you to share your reflections on what's happening now since George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I vividly remember that conversation you and I had, and one of the things that has been helpful to me in my role at the Holocaust Center has been what I have always just taken to be the freedom to be myself and to say the things that I've needed to say, because we're individuals and everybody doesn't always agree, and you can't expect to agree with everybody in the world, but I think you do have to agree to try and hear one another. And I've never felt like my opinions or my thoughts, my way of being has been stifled in any way. Our team has always been really good and receptive to that, and that's not everybody has that. Not everybody has that everywhere they're at. So for me, that's been a blessing. Since all these recent events have happened, and we've had the protests and response, I've had a number of reactions internally, and I've had to do a lot of thinking and soul searching, and I've tried to do a fair share of listening as well. And there's a quote that was given to me, and I'm going to paraphrase that quote because it was in regards to a different group, a different cultural group. But I found that again and again and again, it pays to be mindful of this, which is, in this instance, Black people are not a monolith. So what you're going to see is a range of responses when something like this happens. And throughout the different protests and all the occurrences since then, what you're seeing, there's a range of there's a range of reactions that Black people are feeling. And I've had conversations with some peers and friends, and these reactions run the gamut. Some of us are tired. Well, we're all tired to different degrees. Like that much is true. But some of us are more angry right now. Some of us are more sad. Some of us are more resolute in certain ways of taking care of things. There's some of us who have health concerns. They're like their own health concerns that, to some degree, that stem from what's going on. There's so much going on, but I will say, I'm almost 50 years old, which is older than I ever figured I could be. It is an interesting thing being this age in this time where we are literally watching history unfold in front of us on an almost daily basis right now. And so I think that's unprecedented, certainly in my lifetime, to see like these kind of occurrences back to back to back, these vocal outcries. I'm hopeful that a lot of these changes and things that we're seeing are going to be more long lasting, because it's really easy to get upset or riled up or determined in the moment, but to try and make these changes be things that that result in something that's more long lasting, that's hard. That's hard. That's work that's as difficult as making a melting pot be what it is, live up to its potential. I'm concerned for black people. I'm concerned about our physical well-being. I'm concerned about our mental well-being. There's a lot of pressure that we're obviously under day to day. And, I'm concerned about the whole of the country. I hope that we're learning the right things right now and that these things that we're learning are going to stick. And I can't be, I can't be too Pollyanna-esque about it and just think like, this is the time. This is the thing that's going to do it. This is the movement that's going to make these changes happen. I don't know. I do ascribe to the belief that the moral arc of the universe, as Martin Luther King described it. I do believe that is a real thing. I do believe that we progress over time, but that we have to actively be trying to progress. For myself, I see the intersection of what's happening in the world with the work in CHUTZ-POW. A lot of intersections there in terms of groups being oppressed and voices needing to be heard and stories being heard, and ideally like being heard immediately. I always refer to CHUTZ-POW as being this instructional thing. Like it's not just a textbook. It's not just a history book. Like it's meant to be instructional as far as I'm concerned. Like you should read this thing and it should give you some sense of what you can do in the moment right now. And I think one of the most vital things we can do in the moment is be present and be active. Don't wait. Don't put it off. And that's what we're seeing happen. We're seeing to me the voice that's coming out of all these protests. It's that people need to be listened to right now. These changes are not going to happen if we're us waiting for other things to happen. They're not even necessarily going to happen if we're just like waiting for somebody to legislate them into being in the future. Like changes have to happen right now. You got to be really, really vocal. You have to be super vocal. So if America has a collective superpower, I think that's what it needs to be right now, being super vocal, being super heard. So, I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing America. This is the latest chapter in America's origin story. Every superhero has their origin story, and this is that. So, yeah.
Does it feel different to you from other times that you've seen in your life? Does it feel more hopeful? Does it not feel more hopeful? What do you think?
That's a good question. It's being absorbed by me differently. I know that for sure. I've talked to a few people. I saw an interview with the comedian Leslie Jones recently, and she and we're in the same age category there. And she said how when the LA riots took place back in the early '90s. That she was out there on the streets. She was a part of that. She was right there on the streets. And she said when she was in her early to mid 20s, you could not have told her that that's not where she needed to be at that time. But now, being in her early 50s, she's in a different place. And her reaction is somewhat different and her actions are different in response. And when she said that, and I took a lot of personal comfort from that because I'm in that kind of place myself. I am always grateful that I have my art and my art abilities to express myself through and to communicate with people as well. The blessing of being a creative is that you can communicate with so many people in such an immediate way that I think it doesn't compare to anything else. So is it different? For me, it's different because I'm a better artist than I've ever been. So I have a broader range with which to process what I see, what I think, what I feel, what I believe needs to happen. I have a broader range of abilities to keep others encouraged because I consider that to be a part of my personal charge, my mission with everything I do. I feel more hopeful. I feel more tired, so it's like it kind of balances out. Like, because when you're seeing videos of people being killed in really graphic fashion, and it shouldn't happen, and you're seeing that, but you've been seeing that forever, you get tired. And the question I've been putting to white people has been, or the question I think that they need to put to themselves right now is, are they reacting the way they're reacting because this incident was caught on camera, because it was recorded? Like, are white people only as good as the degree to which they are being observed? How good do white people want to be when they're not being observed? Because this thing that happened, this was nothing new, and this has been happening forever. And to kind of bring that all full circle, our job with CHUTZ-POW is to record history after the fact. One of our survivors we talked to early on said how they didn't have cameras and they didn't have the means to record a lot of what happened, most of what happened back then. So we're effectively recreating that with this series, which is one of the reasons why I take this so seriously. Like, yeah, that's our job. We're trying to stitch that history back together. But right now, we can document that history. But what are we listening to? Are we, because there's Holocaust deniers, and there will be deniers of this, from this day and age as well, of what's happening right now. It almost doesn't matter what evidence you give certain people, they're going to be resolute with that. But because we're making more of an effort, I think, to capture these stories and make sure that these stories have a voice, our superpower, our super voice, I'm more hopeful. That makes me more hopeful that we're spending more time and energy making sure that these stories are being told. So yeah, I'm more hopeful with caution and some reservation.
There is so much to be done. So, what you said makes a lot of sense to me, because, I too am hopeful, even as I see the people around me, white people, really digging in and trying to figure out, where we are in this story.
Sure.
And as you said, we are also not a monolith.
Absolutely.
And we're sitting on a very ugly 400-year history. And there is so much work to be done to know what that history is, to understand where that history has brought us to this day, and to be brave enough to confront it.
Bravery is the key. Bravery is the key, I think, to everything. The bravery is the key that unlocks the ability to do whatever needs to be done. I was reading a history of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, and the author mentioned that one of the reasons that the gains that were able to be made then were possible was that was a period where you saw a lot of black people stop being afraid. And it's not that we have not always had brave black people, but what they were saying was, and I'm paraphrasing here as well, but the idea of you had a group of people who stopped being afraid of like mass repercussions and mass persecution, because what's going to happen is going to happen, but just the idea of like freedom or nothing, like it was all in at that point. And I think that has to happen again and again and again and again. Like when the moment people stop being afraid, they are free to do enormous amounts of the right thing. You're able to just conquer all sorts of obstacles that you didn't think that you could have before. And bravery is the key. Bravery is the thing that unlocks it all. And if there is a single through line I've found in the stories that have inspired me, both in comics and in the real world, it is bravery, and what that can inspire. And it doesn't always inspire success, but I would make a strong argument that bravery always inspires success over the long haul. So as long as you keep that in mind, you may not win this particular fight right now, maybe. But if you stay brave and try to align yourself and ally yourself with others who are brave and who inspire you, I think then you're able to achieve your long-term goals.
I'm going to ask you a question that I think I know the answer already, but if you were to tell the story of this moment, of what's happening right now in this country, how would you do it? And would you do it?
So I'm of the opinion that creatives are always telling stories of the moment. And it almost doesn't matter how they're doing it. And now I'm going to talk about the arts in the broadest sense here, not just comics creators. Although if you could read comics historically, like, you could read comics from their inception to the present, and you could read any kind of comics. You could read superhero comics, you could read whatever. What you will be tracking as you do that is our social progress. But I think that is true of pretty much all art forms. If you look at them historically, you will see social progress reflected in the work. So it's part of the duty, I think, of being a creative to be mindful of the world in which you're creating in. But I think that also happens very naturally. I mean, the world cannot not influence the work that you do. So how would no matter what I'm doing, that work is in there. Part of my response to this current need, all of our current needs, is, a lot of it gets filtered directly into CHUTZ-POW, like directly. A big part of that response is that beautiful multicolored and multi-hued spectrum of creators that we keep on the project. That is, for me, that is a direct response to what we need in the world. But also, like, if I were to, like, more direct tell, like, this story, talk about our protests and our protesters and what they're standing for and what they're trying to change, and Black Lives Matter, I could chronicle it, as in a biographical way. What I think you'll probably see out of me is, like I said, everything gets filtered through that lens of comics for me. And I've already had a few ideas for things that might come to fruition. We'll see. But since then I've thought about what would the story of a young black female Jewish superhero look like right now? What would that be? And where would she be at in the struggles that we're fighting right now? And if you think about if with that confluence of things, young black female Jewish superhero, that's a lot. Like, that character embodies so many different worlds. But that also brings to mind my favorite quote of all time. It's from James Joyce, and it is, "Within the specific is contained the universal." And I think about that in every single creative project I've ever worked on, because my aim is always to be as specific as possible. Because if you do that, if you really focus on an individual story, and what do we say with CHUTZ-POW, and what do we say with this culture anyway? When you hear one story, you've heard one person's story. But if you do it right, you're connecting with a multitude of other stories. And yeah, I'm kind of captivated with the idea of telling the story of a young black female Jewish superhero. In my mind, I can envision that character standing right next to Superman. That, to me, is there's your through line right there. Superman, who was created by two young Jewish boys all those decades ago. And, because we needed Superman back then. We absolutely needed Superman. Superman, by virtue of existing, changed the world. The word Superman, that yanked the meaning behind that away from others who'd been using it abroad, and it gave it a distinctly American meaning and a distinctly moral credibility that it was not on track to having otherwise. So we needed Superman when he arrived. And maybe it's time for us to get this new superhero. And I would love to be able to create her, but if this puts us out into the ether and somebody else with capable hands is capable of creating her, more power to you. But however I tell the story, it's going to be creative, because that's the only way it's the only way I know how to live in the world. It's the only way I know how to speak. So something is going to happen, like something will be created in response to all of this.
I know that many people will join me in waiting for that and looking forward to seeing it. And we know that you are using comics to make change, and change is what we need right now. So I'm honored to be making these efforts with you. Good moment for me to thank you for teaching me how to draw.
you, now thank you for being so great and diligent about that. I love that you've latched onto that, and that you're secret, because you, in doing so, you've actually proven something I've talked with people about forever, which is that most of us have the ability to do that, to create something. And I think we psych ourselves out because we set certain levels for ourselves of what you have to be like to be good. No, it's just like just start creating, and you'll see what you come up with. It's wonderful. I want to say thank you to you specifically for this moment, but also just for the larger value of having me as part of the team at the Holocaust Center. We have the best team, I think, in the world. Like, we've got a great team, and everybody contributes, and everybody is all in. The team we have makes me a better person. So I'm always grateful for that. And I also want to I want to say thank you to our CHUTZ-POW creators, past and present. This current team, they're phenomenal. I can't thank them enough for the hard work that they put in on Volume 4, in the way they've helped this project evolve. And I hope anybody who watches this checks out all their work, because we're going to make all that information's available, and it's on our website. And find CHUTZ-POW, all of them. Find all of our creators, because they're all out there doing just amazing work. They're great people. One thing I can say, we are I'll say, I feel like we're kind of moral snobs because we only have good people who work on CHUTZ-POW. So it works like that. But they make the work good. And then there's a gentleman out there in the world named Andrew Simonet, and he works with artists abroad. He does a lot of speaking and workshops and engagement. And there's a thing he does when he talks to artists, and he did this with me at something I was at. He always leads off by thanking artists for what they do. So I definitely want to put that out there in the world as well. Thanks to any and every artist out there, every writer, every visual artist, every musician, every dancer, every poet, I want to thank every artist out there for what they do, because especially what they're doing right now, that is vital to our historical record. And I want to thank them for being a part of this moment.
That's beautiful, and it's a moment in the era of COVID-19 when the arts are under attack. It has been one of my greatest honors and privileges as director of the Holocaust Center to support the arts through CHUTZ-POW and in other ways. This is one way that we give back to society, and we're never going to stop doing that. This is a part of who we are. So I thank you for saying that, Marcel, and for saying it so beautifully. We do have the best team. When we were talking about being brave and surrounding ourselves with brave people, I was thinking that's exactly what we've done. Absolutely. We have a very brave team, everyone really willing to take risks, to do good things. And that's what this moment is about in so many ways. I mean, be willing, for me personally, for many other people, put ourselves out there and be brave. I've been saying obsessively, let's be on the right side of history. Conversations like the one that we just had are a contribution to that effort to be on the right side of history.
Absolutely.
And I'm so grateful to you. And it's a pleasure to work with you. And I've learned so much from you, and look forward to continuing to learn from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. The feeling is mutual, and you're stuck with me. So
good.
I mean, it wasn't that I didn't expect this, but I think what's really cool is like this conversation, in addition with talking about things that are very important right now, as a creative person, it was a very inspiring conversation. Like, it made me want to go, like, write something, make something, do something. So, like, I think in that respect, it's going to be really powerful, too.
Oh, good. And, you know, I feel like that's the area where I have the most to contribute anyway. You know, like, there's so many voices out there right now that are talking about, like, so many of these other aspects of what's going on. Like, could I talk more about what's happening, you know, through more of a political lens or what? Yeah, but that's not really that's not it. I feel like my energies go best in describing this in the effect on our creative community and what the creative community can do. So, like, this was great. This ended up being a perfect place to do that.
No, I think I think it's good for everybody to know that they have a role to play, and just because you're not the type of person who necessarily wants to, like, go to a protest or whatever, like, this idea of using your superpowers to do something that matters, I think this conversation really led that way. So I think I just thought it was really good.
Well, it reminds me that I meant to close with what I think is your superpower, but I got too caught up in the moment, which is empathy. Your superpower is empathy.
Aww.
We talk all the time about that. It's what we're trying to teach, but the way that you interact with people is with openness and with understanding. And that brings so much to the world. It brings to our team, to everyone you interact with.
I mean, Lauren, I'm still recording. I
know, splice that in. That's why I'm like, pause,
like,
say it, pause.
Don't mind this other woman on the side. Don't look at her. Just.
I love that. I need to write down a list of my real life superpowers based on, like, when people say things like this. It's like, that's, you know, I mean, we're all trying. We're all trying to evolve. And so, like, and so in my comic book hero core, where the one where I have all my people and they're all superheroes, a thing that I don't say overtly, but it comes from a real world belief I have, is like all the superpowered people in that universe, the ones that are actively using their powers, are all just getting more and more powerful. So over time, their abilities are stronger than they are when they start out. But I think that's true in the real world. Like, whatever the thing is you have, you're just evolving. So hopefully, you know, the idea being, if I start out with this much empathy, that's just gonna grow. I hope, like, I think that's everybody. That's not just unique to me. So it's like, you know, it's like a muscle. You gotta use that empathy. So thank you. I'm gonna quote that next time I have an argument with somebody who calls me out for being like a Virgo.
I was just thinking the next time someone calls me out for being a Leo, I'm going to say, I don't care. That's what Leos do.
It's an extremely Leo response.
That was.
Well, I'm like, I'm a Gemini. Don't put me in just one category.
I mean, I'm critical, but it is an organized kind of critical. Because
I'm critical, but I'm right.
Good vibe. You know, something I didn't get to when we were talking was just...
I can also splice in. I might just have a series of, like... things,
yeah, outtakes.
Conversations after the conversation.
That's kind of fun. That's great. Well, you know, because I was thinking about... you know, at the Holocaust Center, you know, we're dealing with heavy subject matter day in, day out. And, you know, similar to the people who are engaged in the activism right now, similar to people involved in Black Lives Matter, similar to people who are waging, you know, campaigns against gun violence, similar to people who are waging efforts for our LGBTQ community, like all these people. But this is like heavy work, you know, that requires a lot of heavy lifting. And to really do it, you got to be really engaged and you got to dig in there. And that wears you down over time. One of the best things I ever heard locally from a local activist, this was a few years ago, it was a panel discussion type thing, and she said how, in her experience, some people get involved in activism in the place of doing their own personal healing. And I've always tried to keep that, like, be mindful of that ever since then, because I think that is very true. And while it's not my job, of course, to tell anybody that I think that might be what they are or not doing, or they should be wary of it, I do like putting that back out there in the world for people to consider, as kind of to give themselves parameters for what they engage in. Because I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think it's very easy to just like engage in a cause with totality because you've got some issues that you're trying to work out, and it's just easier to do that, as hard and draining as it is. But when we're dealing with something like the Holocaust, which that could suck it all out of us at any given moment, but fortunately we have our team which keeps that from happening. I firmly believe that we have such a strong network amongst us that we're not going to let each other fall into that place, that pit. And you got to work at building up that kind of network, that kind of support structure for yourself. I think it's just all important.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have a team of very deeply empathetic people. Mm-hmm. Like just generally everybody that we work with is super kind of understanding. So I think we all do get in that place sometimes, but I think we're all very like understanding and supportive to where nobody's going to like hold it against you and like everyone's rooting for you to come out of it. I feel like everybody's had like situations like that just because now we've all worked together for so long. Like that just happens when you work with people for a long period of time.
I remember last year I was having a very dark period, and a lot of it was our response to the shooting at the Tree of Life building and the pressure that all of us faced with, being open to the public and school groups coming and having to be a public face for a very real tragedy that had just happened. And you all got me flowers. I was just like, it was so sweet. And it meant so much to me because it's, it just shows the reciprocity in our relationships that we don't really function like like I'm the director and I'm not part of this very important group of people, but I really do feel that we're all in this together. And I hope I have made you all feel that way, and you have certainly made me feel that way.
Yeah, very much a team in the spirit of what we're talking about. Very like Avengers.
Upstanders. Maybe just the Holocaust Center staff is the upstanders.
Maybe that's your next comic book.